Have you ever gone through a time of loneliness, struggle, or rejection and wondered if God really cared? Pastor Armstrong, today on The Worthy Walk, you're beginning a powerful series of messages from the Old Testament about people who felt the same way, yet were used greatly by God.
That's right, Steve. We are beginning a four-part series that looks at four people from the Old Testament, and I'm calling it Wilderness Lessons. The wilderness in the Old Testament is an actual location, but I'm actually using it a bit more metaphorically. Wilderness to mean difficult times in our lives, times when we might face fear or rejection or despair. And we're going to look at four people who have traveled through that type of wilderness in their life this week. We're starting off with Joseph, a well-known character in the book of Genesis, and actually his life spans from chapter 37 of the book of Genesis all the way to its end, chapter 50. And so we're going to encapsulate his whole life in one message. So it'll be an interesting and quick journey. The word that I'm using to kind of hang the different stages of his life is the word unexpected. As you know, and as many of our listeners know, Joseph had some unexpected trials, and it seemed to be one trial after another, but it's leading somewhere. And as we near the end of his life, he comes to an understanding of why. It's one of the most fascinating things to think about. Why do these unexpected trials happen to us? Many times we don't have the answer to that question. But Joseph comes to an understanding of why, and I believe it helps us in our understanding of why when we are in the wilderness. And so I think it's going to be a good 4 weeks, and we're going to glean much from the Word of God.
You are listening to The Worthy Walk with Tim Armstrong, teacher, author, and the senior pastor from the chapel in Akron, Ohio. Now let's open up our Bibles and listen as Tim begins to teach us some wilderness lessons.
Today we are beginning a series of messages that I'm calling Wilderness Lessons. And what we're going to be doing over the next 4 weeks is we're going to be looking at a number of individuals from the Old Testament who went through what you might think of as a wilderness experience. Now, when you read the scriptures, you discover that there's an actual location called the wilderness. Jesus himself wandered through the wilderness. John the Baptist spent time in the wilderness. Elijah the prophet, Ruth, Naomi. We could go on and on of the biblical characters who themselves went into a location called the wilderness. But we also understand it more metaphorically as a place of difficulty, a time that you and I can be within the wilderness, a wilderness of despair or rejection or fear. And so as I use the terminology, the wilderness, especially in light of biblical characters, we're using it more in the metaphor of the difficulties they've experienced. Now, why are we doing this? Well, because we can relate with people like this. We all have times of difficulties. We all have times of fear. We all have times that we would best describe as a wilderness time. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to see how God works his will through those wilderness experiences. Today, what we're going to do is start with a man named Joseph. Now, not Joseph, the earthly father of Jesus. We spent a number of weeks unpacking that during the Christmas season. No, I'm talking about the Joseph of the Old Testament. He lived 1,800 years before Christ. He's the son of a man named Jacob. Jacob is also known as Israel in the Old Testament. Jacob had 13 children, 1 daughter, 12 sons. These are the 12 sons of Israel. Joseph was the second son of those 12. The story begins in Genesis 37. It continues all the way through Genesis 50. 13 chapters make up the story of Joseph. And so let me just start with a caveat. We're going to cover all 13 chapters this morning. There is no way we're going to be able to dive deep into some of the details. but we are going to look at the stages of Joseph's life. So you're going to have to hold on, and you're going to have to read quickly, and you're going to have to follow carefully. But we're leading towards a conclusion, and the conclusion is going to be worth the effort of the study. Keep that in mind. 4 stages that we're going to look at in Joseph's life: an unexpected betrayal, an unexpected accusation, an unexpected twist, and an unexpected forgiveness. Those are the 4 stages. The key word is unexpected. And isn't that like a wilderness experience? We don't anticipate a wilderness experience. It's usually unexpected. I had a professor in college who would often say that tragedy is just a phone call away. Isn't that true? I mean, how many times has your life changed in a moment? You learn of a piece of information, you receive a phone call, and immediately it's as if you're thrust into the wilderness. That's what we're going to see in Joseph's life. These were unexpected stages that often led him further and further into a wilderness experience. Let's begin by looking at stage 1, was what I call an unexpected betrayal. Now, we're going to start in Genesis 37, but we're not going to spend a lot of time there. Genesis 37 begins the story. I'm going to begin in verse 1 and give you an overview of what we're looking at, but it doesn't take long until we're into the thick of the plot of this unexpected betrayal. I'm in chapter 37. Let's begin in verse 1. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flocks with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their fathers. In other words, Joseph's a tattletale. Now Israel, which is another name for Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Now, already we're starting to see some of the family dynamics in this passage, aren't we? Right away we see he's the favored son, and you have to ask yourself, how did he know he was the favored son? Because his father told him he was the favored son. Now, I have 3 children, and there have been times when my children will snuggle up against me and they will say, Dad, tell me, do you love me more than... Now, a wise parent will handle that carefully, and what do we normally say? We normally say, no, I love you all the same, I just love you differently, right? Well, not Jacob. Jacob comes right out and he says to Joseph, I love you more than all your other brothers, and I'm going to give you a special gift. I'm going to give you this beautiful colored coat. Well, Joseph exploits the family dynamics, and he makes sure everybody knows he's the favored son. And so his brothers can't stand him. I mean, can you blame him? But it goes even deeper than that. Joseph has a dream. And he has a dream that one day he is going to stand over his entire family, especially his brothers, and he's going to be the superior one. Now you have to remember, they lived in a patriarchal society. The firstborn was always understood to be the leader. It was just understood. It wasn't questioned. Didn't matter what happened. If you were the firstborn son, then you would be the leader of the family. Joseph is saying, no, that's not how it's going to work in our family. I had this special dream, and the dream says, all of you are going to bow down before me. Now, if his brothers disliked him before, then they hated him now. And that's exactly what the text says. Look at the end of verse 8. So they hated him even more for his dream and for his words. His brothers are told by their father they needed to go take the sheep and go on a 50-mile journey to find green pasture. Joseph didn't have to go. Why? Well, because he was the favored son. But these other brothers, the sons of Jacob, take the sheep and they travel 50 miles. They're in Canaan, in what is called the wilderness, up to a place called Shechem. Now we have a map here, so here's Canaan. They travel all the way up to Shechem and then make another little turn to a place called Dothan. Now why do they go here? Because all this area here and then an area off the map is what's called the Fertile Crescent. Remember, they lived in a wilderness environment. They had to move their livestock to a place that they could feed, they could fatten them before then they would shear them or before they would slaughter them for food. And so they're taking them up to this place called the Fertile Crescent. Now, it would not have been an easy journey, but remember, Joseph didn't have to go. So all the brothers do the hard work, and then Jacob says to Joseph, you know what I'd like you to do? After all the work is done, I'd like you to go and just discover what your brothers are doing, see if everything's working out, and then bring a report back to me. In other words, you get the easiest of the jobs. You just ride up there, find out what your brothers are doing, and then turn around and you come back. And so Joseph takes off to go find his brothers, and we pick up the story in verse 17 of the same chapter. Look at it with me. I'm going to be towards the back end of 17. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. And they saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. Now you understand the level of the family dynamics. They said to one another, here comes the dreamer. Come now, let us kill him, throw him into one of the pits. Then we'll say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams. Now, if it wasn't for Reuben, the older brother, this is exactly what would have happened. But Reuben talks them out of killing him. Instead, he talks them into just throwing Joseph in a pit. Later, he was going to come back and he was going to retrieve him and take him home. Reuben goes off on his own, I'm sure, to take care of some of the livestock. And the brothers are there sitting around the campfire, and their brother Joseph, he's in a cistern somewhere. And wouldn't you know it, a band of Ishmaelite traders come by, and they're on their way to Egypt. And the brothers decide to conspire together and to sell Joseph into slavery. And so they pull him up out of the pit, and they sell him to this group of Ishmaelite traders heading to Egypt. Now, stop for just a moment. I want you to imagine how Joseph is feeling at this moment. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. He's this 17-year-old young man. He's free. He has his life ahead of him. He goes off to visit his brothers, and next thing you know, he is sold into slavery. His life is completely changed. He's in the wilderness. What would you expect Joseph to be saying at this moment? God, where are you? But you know what's interesting? All throughout this story, we're going to find a reminder exactly where God is. That God is with Joseph, even in the midst of his wilderness. You see, it's these little nuggets of truth in this story that I would encourage you to go and search out for yourself. This is too broad of a story to find all of these, but let me just mention that one. That what you're going to discover time and time again in this story is God is never far away from Joseph in his wilderness experience. And what does that say about our God when you are in your wilderness experience? You might feel like saying, where are you, God? But he's never far away. Now the story continues. The Ishmaelites traders go on into Egypt, and they end up selling him to the wife of a high-ranking officer in Pharaoh's court, a man named Potiphar. Now we come to the second stage in Joseph's life. Stage 2, what I would coin as the unexpected accusation. Now I'm in Genesis 39, and I'm going to pick it up at verse 3. He's sold into this Egyptian home, and his master, verse 3, saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him and made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. Now imagine that. Here, Joseph sold into slavery, now sold into the home of Potiphar, a positioned man in Pharaoh's court. And because the Lord is with him, he begins to bless him, and he begins to bless that family. And Potiphar entrusts him more and more to all that he has in running of his household. But here's an interesting twist of the story. It's at the end of verse 6. It says, "Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance." Now, why is that important? Because Joseph catches the eye of Potiphar's wife. And throughout the next several paragraphs, we find that Potiphar's wife begins to make advances on this young Hebrew man who is, in all intents and purposes by the text, handsome in form and appearance. Now, you got to put yourself in this place for a moment. Here's a young 17-year-old far away from home, in a situation he didn't expect. His blood runs hot through him. His hormones are raging, and here's a woman who's making advances towards you. What would you do? Joseph is so righteous that he repels from those advances time and time again, until one time he wanders into the house and none of the other servants are there, and she attacks him. And it is a moment where he has to make a quick decision, and as she grabs him, he turns out of his garment and runs, and she's left holding onto his clothes. Well, now she feels scorned. She feels as if she's been rejected, and she walks out into the yard and she finds the other servants and says, "See what this Hebrew slave has done? He tried to attack me." When Potiphar comes home, she lies to him. He believes her and throws Joseph into prison. Unexpected accusation. Now, I just want you to think for a moment. First, you're sold into slavery. If that's not bad enough, then you do the right thing in a bad situation, and now you end up in prison, and that's exactly where he is. He's in prison. Now, how would you feel? How would you feel if this was your life, if your life was unraveling like this? I tell you how I'd feel. I'd be angry. I mean, I'd be angry at everybody. I'd be angry at my brothers for putting me into this situation. I'd be angry at Potiphar's wife because everything seemed to be going fine until she got involved. I'd be angry at the justice system. I'd be angry at God. You say, why God? Well, because you let this happen to me. You see, that's a wilderness experience. You look around, you see, there's nothing I can do. Now, will you notice what the text says in verse 21? The text says, "But the Lord was with Joseph." Can you hold that spot for just a moment and come back to verse 2 of the same chapter? I'm in chapter 39, verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph. That was spoken shortly after he was sold into slavery by his brothers. Now we see he's in prison. And what do we see again? A reassurance. Verse 21, "But the Lord was with Joseph." Again, that's just a reminder. We might be in the wilderness. We might feel God has left us completely alone. But we see over and over again in the text that God himself is saying, no, I'm with you in the wilderness. And then he goes on to say this, "And showed him," this is the Lord, "and showed Joseph steadfast love." Now, we don't see it in our English versions, but this word steadfast, one of the most important words in all of Scripture. It is the Hebrew word hesed, and it literally can be translated as loving kindness. It is a thread that runs all throughout the Old Testament and then again into the New Testament, and it talks of the character of our God. And what is the character statement of God? That he's a loving God. He's a kind God. This particular word occurs as mercy 149 times. He's a merciful God. It occurs as kindness 40 times. It occurs as loving kindness 30 times. Now, you might be thinking, well, this doesn't seem very loving and kind. I mean, God, I think you could show your love a little bit of a different way. But notice, God's always quick to affirm that he is with Joseph in the midst of his wilderness. And here's what I don't want you to miss. It's as if God is saying, I have a plan for your wilderness experience. Stage 3, for lack of better words, I've called this an unexpected twist. You know, every good story has a twist. Every good story has a building plot line. And every good story, just when you think it's going a certain direction, it turns on you. That's what makes this ancient story so lovable and so memorable. You realize that people have been telling this story for literally thousands of years? You see, what we have here is a twist in the plot. Joseph's in prison. Now, you would think that if you're in a foreign prison, your life's over. But that's not how God works. Would you turn over with me to chapter 40? Notice this. It says, sometime after this. After what? After being thrown in prison. The cupbearer of the king. Now, a cupbearer was one who would drink the cup of liquid, juice, wine, drink, prior to the king to ensure that it wasn't poisonous. That's what it means to be a cupbearer. Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king and the baker committed an offense against the Lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with the two officers and the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the prison where Joseph was confined. And the captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, and he attended them. He continued for some time in custody. Now, isn't this just like our God weaving the details of life together? Well, the detail is about to take a twist, because what we find is that the dreamer, Joseph, becomes the interpreter of dreams. The cupbearer and the baker have this strange dream. And they each have their own dream, and it's filled with all kinds of imagery, and they can't understand it. And so they're talking to Joseph. Remember, they're in this confined area. They're in prison. They're talking to Joseph about this dream, and Joseph says, I think I can interpret your dream. The cupbearer starts by saying, I had this dream about a vine. It was the strangest thing. The vine then kind of split into 3 vines, and then after a while, it blossomed. Well, Joseph said, well, I think I understand what that means. Those 3 vines represent 3 days. That blossoming represents that in 3 days, Pharaoh's going to change his mind, and he's going to release you. Now, the chief baker, he gets excited, and he says, you know what? I had a dream kind of like that. It's very similar. But instead of 3 vines, I had this 3 baskets, and these 3 bread baskets. And that out of the baskets were animals, and they were eating that which was out of the basket, and the baskets were on my head. Can you tell me what that means? Joseph says, I'm afraid your dream is a little bit different. In 3 days, you're going to be lifted up and hanged. Those baskets represent your head, and the animals are going to eat out of your head, out of your body. He didn't quite have the same fortune as the cupbearer. Now, if you were either of these two, what would you be doing? You'd be waiting to see if this was coming true. If you were the cupbearer, you were wringing your hands thinking, this might be in great favor. I'm just a day away from release. If you were a baker, you would be doing the opposite. You'd be wringing your hands in fear, thinking, I'm a day away from death. What's going to happen? Well, sure enough, it comes true exactly like Joseph says.
As Pastor Armstrong stated, sometimes we think God seems unkind or unloving because His ways are not our ways. Yet, like we see with Joseph, it is because of His love that He allows us to go through painful situations that we don't understand now, in order for us to have His best later. In messages to come, we will hear more about Joseph and his journey, as well as 3 more people like you and me, people that God used greatly, despite walking through their own wilderness journey. So stay tuned. Keep in mind that today's powerful message can be yours as part of our thank you when you donate to this ministry to help keep the Worthy Walk on the air. If you go to our website, you'll find many resources that Tim has made available for our listeners, people like you, in your walk with the Lord. Whether it's a mini book or the CD set of one of his series, we think that you'll want to take advantage of this opportunity and support the Worthy Walk. Today's message, Wilderness Lessons, reminds us that there is a purpose in our pain and that God is at work through every situation in our lives for our own good. The Worthy Walk is made possible by the generous contributions of listeners like you. And to get your copy of the CD set of Wilderness Lessons, simply call 844-825-1262 to make your contribution over the phone, or, and this is the easiest way, just go to our website, theworthywalk.com. Here you can safely and securely give a gift of $50, $30, or just $20, and we'll send your copy of Wilderness Lessons on CD. If you'd like to write us and send a contribution that way, the address, P.O. Box 1262, Akron, Ohio 44309, and our phone number one more time, 844-825-1262. Thanks again for listening. I'm Steve Browning. On behalf of Tim and the staff at The Worthy Walk, I invite you to come back and keep learning verse by verse how to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord. Here on The Worthy Walk with Pastor Tim Armstrong. This program has been paid for by The Worthy Walk and the ministry of Tim Armstrong.